Have you ever noticed how heavy a thought can be? It weighs nothing on a scale, yet it can feel like you are carrying a mountain on your shoulders. It keeps you awake. It keeps you tight. It keeps you from the peace you deserve. I'm glad you're here. If you are listening to this, it's likely that your day has been long, or your mind is busy. Perhaps you are replaying conversations, worrying about tomorrow, or simply feeling a tension you can't quite name. That is okay. You don't need to force it to stop. And if you feel like it, you can gently let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Sometimes, it's comforting to realize how many of us are quietly sharing this same moment from different corners of the world. You see, the mind is like a guardian dog. It barks at shadows because it wants to protect you. We don't need to yell at the dog to be quiet. We just need to gently let it know that we are safe, so it can lay its head down and rest. For the next hour, I am going to share a collection of stories with you. These aren't just fairy tales. They are mirrors. Some are from the Zen tradition, some from Stoic philosophy, and some are simple metaphors for the human experience. Each story revolves around two things: the art of letting go and the discovery of your inner strength. You don't need to memorize these stories. You don't even need to listen to every word. If you drift off to sleep in the middle of a sentence, that is perfect. That is the goal. Think of my voice as a gentle breeze. You can enjoy it while it's there, but you don't need to hold on to it. Get comfortable now. Adjust your pillows. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Unclench your jaw. Let's begin with our first journey, a journey about the weight we choose to carry. The kind of anger that scares you isn't always the loud kind. Sometimes it's the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't shout. It just hardens. It settles in like dry ground that hasn't seen rain in a long time. You can still function. You can still smile at the right times. You can still get through a day. But inside, everything feels stiff, tight, like you've stopped expecting softness because softness keeps getting stepped on. That night, they were standing at the kitchen sink, sleeves pushed up the faucet, running in a thin, steady stream. The dishwasher was on behind them, doing its slow, rhythmic job, water moving, turning, humming like a distant machine in a different room. The only light in the kitchen came from a small lamp on the counter. Warm, dim, enough. They weren't washing dishes because the dishes demanded it. They were washing dishes because their hands needed something simple to do. Earlier, there had been a moment at work that shouldn't have mattered this much. A comment, a little edge in someone's voice, a kind of casual impatience that landed like a slap because it wasn't the first time. It wasn't even the fifth. It was just part of the pattern. The kind of pattern that makes your body start bracing before you even walk into the building. They had nodded, kept their tone neutral, done what they needed to do. On the outside, it looked fine. But on the drive home, their mind began building the whole case. Everything they should have said. Everything they were tired of swallowing. All the small humiliations that stacked up until one more made the pile topple. Now in the kitchen, The anger wasn't exploding. It was simmering. It felt like a tight band around the ribs, like pressure behind the eyes, like the urge to be sharp with anyone who got too close. They set a mug on the counter and poured hot water into it. The steam rose quietly. They dropped in a tea bag, nothing fancy, just something familiar, and watched the water darken in slow swirls. The spoon hit the side of the mug with a soft clink as they stirred. Clink, clink, clink. A small sound, a steady sound, a sound that didn't argue with them. They didn't think I need to forgive. That would have felt ridiculous. Too big, too clean. They weren't in a clean place. They were in a tired place. The kind of tired that makes anger feel like armor. They took one sip. Too hot. They set the mug down, exhaled through their nose, and turned back to the sink. A plate, a fork, a pan with a stubborn ring of dried sauce that required more effort than it deserved. They scrubbed a little too hard at first. The sponge squeaked. Their hand pressed down like the pan had personally offended them. And then they noticed what they were doing. Not in a judging way, just noticing. It was the same pressure they wanted to put into their words earlier, the same force behind the message they almost wanted to send, the same desire to make something give. They stopped scrubbing for a second and let the pan sit under the warm water. The heat loosened the dried ring without drama, without violence, just time and warmth and repetition. They watched it soften, and something in their chest shifted, not because the problem was solved, but because the method was different. They didn't have to attack the pan to change it. They didn't have to punish it. They didn't have to win. They just had to stay with it long enough, gently enough for it to loosen. It felt almost annoying how true that was. Anger wants immediate results. It wants a moment that feels satisfying, a sharp sentence, a comeback, a slammed door, a message that lands like a punch. But life rarely changes from one punch. Life changes from what you keep doing over time, from what you repeat. They rinsed the pan, set it aside, and listened to the dishwasher hum. The kitchen smelled faintly like soap and steam. The night outside the window was dark and still. They thought about the person who'd been sharp with them earlier, just for a second. Not as an enemy, not as a villain, just as a human body moving through a day. A person with their own tight chest, their own pressure, their own dry places inside. That thought didn't make what happened okay. It didn't erase anything, but it did something small. It loosened the story that said, "This is personal. This is about me. They're doing this because I'm not worth respect." Maybe it wasn't about worth at all. Maybe it was about dryness meeting dryness. They took another sip of tea, still hot but drinkable now. Their shoulders lowered a fraction. They looked at the sink, still full of dishes, still unfinished. They didn't feel cheerful. They didn't feel saintly. They just felt a little less clenched. Outside, the world wasn't dramatic either. The night didn't demand a verdict. The night didn't ask them to be the bigger person in some heroic way. It just offered a quiet space where the heat could cool if they stopped adding fuel. They turned the faucet down and let the water run softer. A calmer sound. less force, more flow. And they kept going, one plate, one fork, one slow breath at a time, without trying to fix their whole heart in a single evening. They left the last dish in the rack to dry on its own and turned off the faucet. The sudden quiet felt louder than the water had been. For a moment they just stood there, hands resting on the edge of the sink, feeling the warmth slowly leave their skin. The anger was still present. It hadn't vanished during the dishes. It just wasn't hard anymore. It felt more like a sore muscle than a clenched fist. Something tender instead of sharp. They carried the mug to the table and sat down, wrapping both hands around it. The heat seeped in, steady and patient. Outside the window, the night had settled into a deep stillness. No cars passed. No voices floated up. Just the faint reflection of the kitchen light on dark glass. They thought again about the moment from earlier. The tone, the look, the way the comment had landed. Their body replayed it, but this time the replay didn't speed up. It moved slower, like a scene watched from a little farther away. What stood out now wasn't the words themselves, but the weariness underneath them. Not just in the other person, but in themselves. The exhaustion of always adjusting, of always absorbing the edge so things wouldn't escalate, of carrying the unspoken expectation to be patient, to be kind, to be the one who smooths things over. That was the part that had hardened. Not cruelty, fatigue. They set the mug down and leaned back in the chair. The anger had been trying to protect that tired place. It had been saying, "Enough. I can't keep being scraped like this." When they saw it that way, the anger made more sense. It wasn't something to crush. It was something to listen to carefully. Gentleness didn't mean ignoring that message. It meant deciding how to respond to it. They imagined what would happen if they reacted the way the anger wanted. The sharp words, the cold distance, the satisfaction that would last a few seconds, maybe a minute. And then the quiet aftermath, the tension, the regret, the sense of having made things harder, not clearer. They'd been there before. They also imagined doing nothing, just swallowing it again, letting the dryness stay dry. That path felt familiar too, and heavy. So they looked for a third option, not dramatic, not noble, just workable. The rain image came back to them not as poetry, but as something practical. Dry ground doesn't soften all at once. You don't pour a bucket of water on it and expect it to change. That just runs off the surface. What changes it is slow rain, repeated, unimpressive. The kind you barely notice until one day the ground gives a little under your foot. They didn't need to forgive everything tonight. They didn't need to have the perfect conversation. They just needed to choose one small action that didn't add more heat. They picked up their phone and opened a blank note. Not a message, just a place to put words where they wouldn't hurt anyone. They wrote a few sentences, plain, honest, unpolished. What had bothered them? What they wished had been different, where they felt stretched thin. They didn't analyze the sentences. They didn't turn them into a script. They just let them exist. When they finished, they closed the note without saving it. The anger eased a little more, not because it had been solved, but because it had been acknowledged. They rinsed the mug and set it in the rack. The dishwasher hummed on, steady and unbothered by any of this. The kitchen light felt softer now, like it had dimmed on its own. Tomorrow they might say something. Or they might wait and see. They could choose their moment, their tone, their timing. That choice didn't have to be made under pressure. It didn't have to be made while their chest was still tight. Forgiveness, they realized, didn't have to look like warmth towards someone who had been careless. Sometimes it looked like not turning hard yourself, like keeping your own inner ground from cracking further. They turned off the kitchen light and walked into the darker part of the house. The air felt cooler, calmer. The anger was still there, faint, but present, like the smell of rain after it stopped. They lay down without replaying the moment again. Their breath found a slower pace, not because they forced it, but because nothing was pushing anymore. The ground inside them hadn't turned soft overnight, but it had absorbed a little water, and that was enough for now. Some grudges don't feel dramatic. They feel reasonable, like something you've earned the right to carry. They sit quietly in the background of your day, flavoring everything just a little. Conversations taste sharper. Silence tastes bitter. Nothing is unbearable, but nothing is clean either. That evening, she was at a laundromat a few blocks from home, the kind that stayed open late and smelled faintly of detergent and warm metal. Rows of machines thumped and turned in steady rhythm. A TV bolted to the wall played a muted game show no one was really watching. The fluorescent lights were bright but tired. She slid coins into a washer and pushed the door closed with her hip. The machine started with a low churn, water rushing in like it always did. She sat down on a hard plastic chair and set her bag at her feet. This wasn't where she planned to be tonight. But her apartment washer had broken again, and she didn't have the patience to deal with it. The day had already asked too much. Earlier, there had been a call. Short, familiar. A voice on the other end that knew exactly how to press the old buttons without raising its own volume. Nothing outright cruel, just dismissive enough. Enough to remind her of how often she'd been expected to understand, to bend to be the bigger person. She'd hung up politely. She always did. Now sitting there, the anger came back in waves. Not sharp, but salty. Like something she'd been sipping from all day without realizing how much it was dehydrating her. She leaned back and watched the washer spin. Clothes slapped gently against the drum, socks, shirts, a towel she'd owned for years. Ordinary things going around and around, over and over, until they came out clean. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't check it. She already knew who it would be. Or maybe not who, but what. Another message. Another attempt to smooth things over without actually changing anything. She crossed her arms and felt the familiar tightening in her chest. It wasn't just about tonight. It never was. It was about the accumulation. The way small hurts stacked up until they felt heavy. On the vending machine near the door, a plastic bottle of water reflected the harsh light. She stood, walked over, fed in a few coins, and twisted the cap off. The water was cold, almost painfully so. She took a long drink. It tasted off. Not bad exactly. Just wrong. She frowned and took another sip. Same thing. A faint bitterness she couldn't place. She looked at the bottle, then at her hand. There was salt on her fingers, left over from a soft pretzel she'd grabbed earlier without thinking. She'd wiped her hand on a napkin, but not enough. The salt had transferred to the bottle's mouth. She laughed quietly at herself. A small sound quickly swallowed by the machines. One pinch of salt didn't seem like much, but in a small bottle it changed everything. She rinsed the bottle cap at the sink and drank again. This time the water tasted clean, neutral, what it was supposed to be. She stood there a moment longer, letting that register, not as a lesson, not as advice, but as a simple fact. Some things only stay bitter because you keep them in a small container. She went back to her chair and watched the washer finish its cycle. The machine slowed, then stopped with a final dull thud. She moved her clothes to the dryer, poured in detergent, closed the door. Another rhythm began. Thump. Pause. Thump. The anger in her chest shifted. It didn't disappear, but it spread out. It felt less concentrated, less sharp. She thought about the call again, but this time without rehearsing what she should have said. She thought about it like it was just one drop in a much bigger body of water. Important, yes, but not the whole story of her life. Forgiveness didn't feel close. That word still felt like something she wasn't ready to touch. But something else felt possible, not carrying this one moment so tightly. She imagined holding the resentment like a small fistful of salt. Powerful in the palm, sharp on the tongue, useful in the right amount, but punishing when kept close. She didn't need to throw it away tonight. She didn't need to pretend it didn't exist. She just needed to stop drinking from it. The dryer hummed on. The TV flickered. Someone laughed softly on the other side of the room. Life continued unbothered by the tight story she'd been telling herself. She took another sip of water. Clean, simple. And for the first time that evening, her shoulders dropped without being told. She folded her clothes slowly, one piece at a time, as the dryer finished its last lazy turn. The warmth clung to the fabric, familiar and grounding. A shirt, a towel, a pair of socks that never quite stayed together. Ordinary things warm in her hands, asking for nothing more than to be put away. The laundromat had grown quieter. One machine stopped. Another started. Somewhere near the door, someone yawned without trying to hide it. The TV was still on, but no one was watching anymore. She stacked the folded clothes neatly in her basket and sat for a moment before standing. The anger was still there, but now it felt diluted, like it had been spread across a wider space instead of sitting heavy in one tight spot. On the drive home, she noticed how her thoughts kept trying to return to the call, the familiar pull. The urge to replay it, polish it, squeeze meaning out of every word. Each time it surfaced, she didn't push it away. She just let it widen the way water widens when it meets something larger. By the time she parked, the street was quiet. Porch lights glowed softly. A dog barked once, then settled. She carried the laundry inside and set it down without rushing to put everything away. In the kitchen, she poured herself another glass of water. This time she rinsed her hands first without thinking. The glass was clean. The water tasted like nothing at all. And that nothing felt like relief. She leaned against the counter and drank it slowly. Her body responded before her thoughts did. A small sigh. A release she hadn't planned. She thought again about the person on the other end of the phone call. Not with tenderness, not with blame either. Just with distance. Enough distance to see that whatever they carried, whatever they were repeating, didn't need to become her entire inner climate. It struck her then how often resentment behaves like a solution. How it promises protection, control, clarity. But what it really does when held too close is shrink the space you live in. Everything starts to taste the same. Sharp, overbearing, too much. She didn't need to forgive tonight. She didn't need to call anyone back or write a careful message. She just needed to notice the size of the container she was holding this feeling in. She imagined the resentment again as salt. In a small glass, it ruined the water. But poured into a lake, it disappeared. Not because it was denied, but because it wasn't concentrated anymore. Her life was bigger than this moment. Bigger than this call. Bigger than the pattern she was tired of. That thought didn't feel dramatic. It felt practical. She carried the basket to the bedroom and set it at the foot of the bed. Instead of folding everything right away, she lay back for a moment, still dressed lights low. The ceiling fan turned slowly above her, slicing the air into gentle pieces. Her phone rested on the nightstand. It stayed quiet. She didn't check for messages. She didn't brace for them either. She let the space exist as it was, unanswered, open. Forgiveness, she realized, didn't always arrive as a feeling towards someone else. Sometimes it arrived as restraint toward yourself, as the choice not to keep pouring bitterness into a small cup and calling it strength. She turned onto her side and listened to the soft mechanical rhythm of the fan. Her breath matched it without effort. The anger hadn't vanished, but it no longer dominated the room. It was just one element among many, like salt in the air near the ocean. Present, but not overwhelming. Tomorrow she might speak up, or she might set a boundary, or she might decide that some conversations didn't deserve the same energy anymore. All of those options were still available. Tonight she didn't need to solve it. She closed her eyes and let the quiet do its work. The water inside her felt clean again. He didn't think of the other person as an enemy. Not out loud anyway. He used softer words. Difficult, toxic, impossible. But in his body it felt the same, a tightness that showed up the second he saw their name. A heat that rose before he even chose it. That afternoon, he came home later than usual and didn't take his shoes off right away. He stood in the entryway with his keys still in his hand, staring at nothing. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that gives your mind room to start building a whole movie. He'd had a conversation earlier that didn't go well. It wasn't a screaming fight. It was worse in a way: controlled voices, polite language, and that cold, sharp feeling underneath. The kind of exchange where you walk away looking fine, but your chest stays tight for hours after. Now he sat in his living room with one lamp on and the rest of the lights off. The TV stayed dark. He didn't want noise. He didn't want distraction. He wanted something to make sense. On the coffee table was an empty chair across from him. Just a simple dining chair he'd pulled in earlier when he cleaned and never moved back. Nothing special about it. But tonight it stood out in the dim room like it had a purpose. He stared at it, and without meaning to, he started talking in his head. Not to the chair exactly. To the person he was angry with. He replayed the conversation. He corrected his own lines. He imagined better comebacks, stronger boundaries, cooler delivery. He imagined saying the one sentence that would finally make them understand. It never worked. The imaginary version of them never softened. They always had another excuse, another deflection, another way to make him feel like he was overreacting. Even in his own mind, he couldn't win. He stood up, walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and drank it too fast. The cold hit his throat and didn't fix anything. He leaned on the counter, jaw tight, and felt the anger in his body looking for a place to land. It would have been so easy to call them, or text, or send some final clear message that said, "I'm done." That's what anger wants sometimes. A clean cut, a dramatic release. A door slammed so loudly the whole house knows it happened. But he didn't want drama. He wanted peace, and peace felt far away. He went back to the living room and sat down again facing the empty chair. He didn't know why he kept looking at it. Maybe because the chair was simple. It didn't argue. It didn't twist his words. It didn't demand anything. It just sat there quiet. And then he remembered something a therapist had once said years ago in a session he'd almost forgotten. Sometimes imagine the person you're furious with as a child. Not to excuse them, just to see them. At the time, he'd rolled his eyes. It had sounded like therapy speak, like a trick. But now, staring at the empty chair, he tried it anyway. Not with enthusiasm, not with hope. Just as an experiment he didn't have to believe in. He pictured the person sitting there, but not as they were now. He pictured them much younger, small, maybe 7 or 8, legs not reaching the floor, swinging slightly. A kid in a hoodie that was a little too big. The kind of kid who had learned early how to act tough so no one would see how scared they were. The image wasn't clear. He didn't know their childhood story. He wasn't inventing a whole biography. He just held the simplest version, a small person with pain they didn't know how to handle. And to his surprise, the anger in his chest didn't get bigger. It hesitated. Not because he suddenly felt warm toward them. He didn't. But something shifted in the story. The story moved from their evil to their hurt. And hurt people don't always act in ways that make sense. Hurt people often act in ways that spread hurt. That didn't make it okay. It just made it less personal. He felt a small release in his shoulders, like a knot loosening. It was subtle, but it was real. He breathed out and realized he'd been holding his breath. He stared at the chair again and let the image stay there, this smaller version, sitting silently, not defending, not attacking, just existing. He thought, if that kid had been held better, would this adult still be like this? He didn't know. There was no answer. But the question itself softened something. He looked down at his hands. They were clenched without him noticing. He opened them slowly, fingers relaxing one by one, and rested them on his thighs. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about pretending they didn't cause harm. Maybe it was about refusing to keep carrying the harm in his own body, hour after hour, day after day. The chair stayed empty, of course. The room stayed quiet. But inside him, something had stopped sprinting. He stayed seated longer than he meant to. The room didn't change, but his body did. The heat that had been pushing against his ribs softened into something duller, heavier. Not gone, just quieter. Like a sound fading into the background once you stop listening for it. The image of the child in the chair lingered. Not vividly, more like a presence. A small shape that didn't speak, didn't argue, didn't justify anything. Just sat there, legs dangling, waiting. He noticed how different his breath felt now. Still not calm exactly, but deeper, less sharp. His chest wasn't braced the way it had been earlier, like it was preparing for impact that never came. He thought about how much effort anger takes, how it asks you to stay alert, to remember details, to keep score, how it demands your attention again and again, long after the moment has passed. Carrying it had started to feel like a second job. He stood up and walked to the window, resting his hand against the glass. Outside, the street was quiet. A porch light glowed a few houses down. Somewhere a dog barked once and stopped. The world didn't seem to be holding its breath the way he had been. When he turned back to the chair, the image shifted slightly. The child wasn't looking at him anymore, just staring at the floor, shoulders slightly hunched, like someone used to being misunderstood or not seen at all. He felt a brief ache in his chest, not sympathy exactly, more like recognition. He knew that posture. He'd worn it himself once, years ago, in different rooms with different people. That realization didn't erase the harm that had been done. It didn't change the words that had been said or the way they had landed. But it did something quieter. It interrupted the story that said this pain needed to keep circulating forever. He realized then that he'd been confusing forgiveness with closeness, as if letting go meant reopening doors that had already proven unsafe, as if easing his grip meant inviting more damage. But forgiveness, at least the kind he could live with, didn't require any of that. It didn't ask him to call. It didn't ask him to explain. It didn't ask him to reconcile. It only asked him to stop letting this person live rent-free inside his body. He walked back to the couch and sat down again, this time not directly facing the chair, just beside it. The child image faded on its own like a daydream losing focus when you stop feeding it. What remained was a simple truth he hadn't allowed himself to feel before he was tired of being angry. Not because anger was wrong, but because it had stopped serving him. It had protected him once. It had signaled something important. But now, it was just repeating itself, asking for energy he didn't have. He placed his feet flat on the floor and let his hands rest open on his thighs. The room felt larger somehow. Or maybe he felt less crowded inside it. He thought about tomorrow, about what he might say or not say, about boundaries that didn't need speeches, about distance that didn't require hostility. Those options existed now calmly, without urgency. The empty chair stayed where it was just furniture again. Wood and fabric, no story attached. He stood, turned off the lamp, and let the room go dark. The anger hadn't vanished, but it no longer felt like a storm he had to stand inside. It felt more like weather that had passed through and moved on. As he lay down, he noticed how his jaw finally unclenched on its own. His shoulders settled into the mattress. His breath found a rhythm that didn't need guidance. Forgiveness, he realized, wasn't something he did for the person who hurt him. It was something he allowed himself so he didn't have to keep replaying the same moment every night. He didn't need to rewrite the past. He didn't need to understand them better. He didn't need an apology to rest. He just needed to stop sitting across from an empty chair arguing with someone who wasn't there. The house stayed quiet. The night held its shape. And for the first time in a while, he let himself be held by it too. Fear doesn't always come as a sharp feeling. Sometimes it comes as distance. The space between where you are and where you think you're supposed to be. The stretch of road where you can't see what's ahead and your mind fills the gap for you. It was late, but not late enough to feel dramatic. Just one of those in-between hours when the day has let go and the night hasn't fully taken over. A person was driving home on a familiar stretch of freeway. The kind they could almost do with their eyes closed, but didn't, of course. Traffic was light. Not empty, just thinned out. Enough space between cars to breathe. The dashboard glowed softly. Nothing flashy. Speed steady. The radio was off, not because they wanted silence for some higher reason, but because music felt like too much information right now. Silence felt easier to manage. Ahead, the road curved gently to the right, one of those long bends where you lose sight of what comes next. No dramatic turn, no warning signs, just a slow disappearance of the lane as it slides out of view. They felt it in their chest before they named it. That small tightening. That familiar thought. What if something's wrong up there? It wasn't about the road. Lately, life had started to feel like this stretch of freeway. Decisions half made, conversations postponed. Plans that used to feel solid now felt provisional, penciled in. They weren't in crisis. That almost made it worse. There was nothing obvious to fix, just a constant sense of not knowing. The mind doesn't like not knowing. It wants edges. It wants conclusions. It wants to see the whole map before it agrees to move forward. And when it can't, it calls the feeling fear, even if nothing is actually threatening you. Their hands rested at the bottom of the steering wheel. Not tight, not loose. The car moved smoothly following the curve without needing instruction. Headlights swept over the asphalt, lighting only what was immediately in front of them. Nothing more. They noticed how the road didn't ask them to see the entire way. It only asked for the next few seconds, the next small stretch of pavement, the next marker line sliding past. Still, the thought came back. What if the road ends? It was an irrational thought. They knew this freeway. It didn't end like that. But fear doesn't need novelty. It uses familiar places too. They remembered being younger, always wanting to know the outcome before committing. If I can see how this turns out, I'll start. If I can be sure, I'll go. But certainty has a way of staying just out of reach. The bend continued. The far edge of the road stayed hidden. No accident lights, no sudden stops. Just darkness ahead, patiently waiting its turn to be lit. They exhaled without realizing they'd been holding their breath. There's something strange about curves. They feel like interruptions, but they're actually part of the flow. The river doesn't stop because it turns. It doesn't apologize for blocking your view. It keeps moving whether you trust it or not. A car passed them on the left, briefly lighting the inside of their vehicle. A face flashed by. Someone else heading somewhere unknown to them, but apparently not a problem. They thought about all the times fear had shown up, not as danger, but as hesitation. The job they delayed applying for because they couldn't picture the outcome. The relationship they held back from because they didn't know where it would go. The version of themselves they postponed becoming because it didn't come with guarantees. Fear loves the phrase, "not yet." It sounds reasonable, responsible, but sometimes it's just a way of staying still. The road began to straighten, gradually, almost imperceptibly. The bend loosened, and a longer stretch of freeway revealed itself, lit by a sequence of streetlights like quiet reassurance. Nothing special, just continuation. They didn't feel relieved exactly, more like corrected, as if something inside them had been assuming the worst without checking the facts. They realized they'd been gripping the wheel more than necessary. Their fingers softened. The car didn't wobble. It didn't need their tension to stay on course. That was something worth noticing. Life too often keeps moving even when you stop clenching around it. The fear didn't vanish. It rarely does. It just lost its argument, lost its claim to being the only explanation. They passed a familiar exit and didn't take it. Not because they were avoiding something, but because tonight they felt okay staying on the road a little longer, letting the drive finish itself. The sky above the freeway was dark but clear. No stars visible this close to the city, just a wide open black that didn't feel threatening. It felt neutral, spacious. They thought about the river again. How standing at a bend doesn't mean the water ends there. It just means you don't get to see everything at once. Maybe that's not a flaw in the design. Maybe that's the design. The car moved forward. The road held. The night stayed quiet. And for now, that was enough to keep going. The drive continued without asking anything from them. No sudden lane changes, no alerts. Just the steady agreement between the car and the road that if both kept doing what they were doing, they'd arrive somewhere eventually. They reached another curve gentler than the last. This one wrapped left, then eased open again. The pattern repeated itself, and something about that repetition felt oddly calming. Turn, reveal, continue. Nothing dramatic, nothing final. They noticed their shoulders drop just a little, not because they told them to, but because there was no longer a reason to hold them up. The body is often ahead of the mind when it comes to letting go. Fear had a quieter voice now. It wasn't shouting questions anymore. It was more like a background suggestion. You should be careful. You should think ahead. Those thoughts didn't feel wrong. They just didn't need to be in charge. The headlights kept doing their job, illuminating exactly what was necessary and no more. The road didn't demand vision beyond that. It didn't punish them for not knowing what was miles ahead. It accepted their limited view and worked with it. They thought about how often they'd tried to light up the entire future at once. How exhausting that had been, replaying conversations that hadn't happened yet, planning responses to outcomes that never arrived, carrying anxiety like a responsibility. Maybe seeing everything isn't the point. Maybe the point is staying with what's here long enough to notice it's enough to move forward. A semi-truck rolled by in the opposite direction, its lights briefly flooding the inside of the car. For a second, everything was bright and loud. Then it passed, and the night returned to its usual tone, unchanged. That moment stayed with them. How quickly intensity comes and goes. How rarely it lasts as long as fear predicts. They reached a stretch of road where the city thinned out. Fewer buildings, fewer exits. The darkness felt wider here, but not heavier. It was the kind of darkness that doesn't hide things so much as give them space. The river image came back again uninvited. Standing at the edge, watching water move past a bend you can't see around. Trusting that movement doesn't need your supervision. Rivers don't pause at uncertainty. They don't wait until the whole route is visible. They move with gravity, with conditions, with what's present. There was a lesson there, but it didn't need to be spelled out. It worked better as an image, something the mind could rest on without picking apart. They changed lanes smoothly, signal clicking on and off, a small sound that felt reassuring in its predictability. One thing at a time. Indicate, move, continue. The fear tried one last angle. What if you choose wrong? They let the question pass without answering it. Not every question needs a response. Some lose their power when they're not fed. The freeway sign for their exit appeared ahead. White letters glowing softly. Familiar. They didn't feel rushed to take it, but they did. The car slowed. The turn was easy. As they moved onto the ramp, the road narrowed, then curved again. Another bend, another moment of not seeing what was next. And yet, nothing about it felt threatening anymore. They realized something then, not as a breakthrough, but as a quiet recognition. Uncertainty hadn't gone anywhere. They just weren't fighting it. And in not fighting it, It had become lighter. The car rolled through a neighborhood of dim streetlights and quiet houses. Windows dark, lawns still. The world felt like it was holding its breath, but in a peaceful way. They parked, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment before getting out. The silence after the car shut down was deep, complete. No hum, no movement, just presence. They didn't try to name what they felt. Naming would have pulled them back into analysis. Instead, they stayed with the simple fact that they had arrived without needing to see every mile beforehand. That felt important. They stepped out of the car. Cool air wrapped around them. Somewhere nearby, a porch light flicked on, then off. A small, ordinary moment in someone else's evening. As they walked toward the door, they thought again of the road behind them. All those curves, all that darkness that had turned out to be just night. Fear often tells us the bend is the end. Experience slowly teaches otherwise. They unlocked the door, went inside, and let the day finish itself. Some things don't reveal themselves all at once. They reveal themselves as you keep moving. And for tonight, that was enough. Fear doesn't always feel like danger. Sometimes it feels like timing. Like you're holding on just a second too long, because letting go feels irresponsible even when staying put is slowly wearing you out. It was early evening, the kind of hour when the building is technically still open, but mostly empty. A community gym sat between a daycare and a closed pizza place. Its windows fogged slightly from the warmth inside, meeting the cold outside. The parking lot lights had already come on, casting wide yellow circles on the asphalt. Inside the space was quiet in a way gyms rarely are. No music, no clanging weights. Just the faint echo of footsteps and the soft squeak of sneakers against polished floor. A person stood near the far wall holding a small bag of chalk in one hand. They hadn't meant to come here tonight. It was supposed to be a quick stop, maybe 10 minutes, just to move their body and clear their head. That was the story they told themselves. But they'd been standing there for a while now, not moving much at all. They rubbed a little chalk between their palms. The powder clung to their skin, pale and dry. When they clapped their hands once softly, a small cloud rose and drifted down. No drama, no audience. Above them, suspended from the ceiling, were 2 long straps used for training, nothing fancy, just sturdy and practical. They weren't here to perform. They weren't even especially good at this. What drew them back every so often was the pause. That moment in between. Lately, life had felt like one long hold. Holding a job that no longer fit. Holding a version of themselves they'd outgrown, but didn't know how to replace. Holding conversations in their head that never quite made it into the room. They had options. That was part of the problem. Too many ways this could go. Too many possible outcomes to weigh. So they held on, waiting for clarity to arrive first. It rarely does. They stepped onto the mat, shoes soft against the surface. The air smelled faintly of rubber and cleaning spray. Familiar. Neutral. Nothing that asked them to feel a certain way. They reached up and wrapped one hand around a strap. The grip felt solid, reliable. The second hand followed. Both palms now chalked, both arms engaged. The body knew what to do, even if the mind hesitated. There was a moment, always the same moment, when the ground stopped feeling like an option. When staying and letting go were suddenly the only two choices left. They didn't move yet. Fear showed up right on time. It sounded reasonable. What if you slip? What if you let go and there's nothing there? What if this is the wrong moment? Fear loves the space between actions. It thrives in pauses. It turns them into interrogations. They tightened their grip just a little. Their shoulders tensed. The strap didn't move. It didn't reassure them either. It simply existed. They remembered watching trapeze artists once years ago, not in person, but in a video. What stayed with them wasn't the swing or the catch. It was the release. That brief, weightless instant, when the performer wasn't holding anything yet, hadn't fallen either. That was the part that looked terrifying. That was also the part that looked free. They inhaled slow and steady, not as a technique, but because the body needed air. Their arms began to feel the effort of holding. Muscles don't lie. They don't care about plans or timing. They just respond to what's happening. Holding forever isn't an option. They shifted their weight slightly. The mat below seemed farther away than it actually was. The strap creaked faintly above a small sound that brought them back into the room. What if letting go isn't failure? What if it's just transition? The questions didn't arrive as conclusions. They were more like openings, cracks in the story fear had been telling. They thought about all the times they'd stayed too long. Not because it was right, but because leaving felt scarier than staying. The job, the city, the version of themselves that felt safe simply because it was familiar. Fear had convinced them that endurance was the same as strength. Their grip began to tire. Fingers flexed involuntarily. Chalk dust fell in tiny grains, catching the overhead light for a brief second before disappearing. They noticed something then. Noticed that the moment they'd been dreading wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, almost ordinary. Just a breath. Just a decision. They didn't let go yet, but they stopped tightening. That small change mattered. The body adjusted. Shoulders lowered a fraction. The strain softened. The fear lost a bit of its urgency when it wasn't being resisted or obeyed. They stayed there, suspended between ground and movement, long enough to realize that the pause itself wasn't the enemy. It was just a space that didn't need to be filled with certainty. Below them, the mat waited. It always had. It wasn't judging the timing. It wasn't counting seconds. The only thing that felt heavy now was the idea that they had to know what came next before they were allowed to move. They exhaled. The pause widened. And for the first time that evening, they felt something loosen, not the grip, not yet, but the belief that holding on was the only safe option. Time didn't stretch the way it usually does when fear is in charge. It didn't race either. It simply continued steady and neutral, like the building itself breathing around them. They were still holding the strap, but the moment had changed. Not because something dramatic happened, but because something quietly stopped happening. They were no longer arguing with the pause. The body made small adjustments on its own. Fingers shifted. Wrists settled into a position that used less effort. The shoulders found a more honest place to rest. Holding was still work, but it wasn't desperate work anymore. Fear noticed the change and tried again, softer this time. You don't have to rush. You can wait a little longer. That voice didn't sound wrong. It sounded caring even. That's how fear keeps its influence, by disguising itself as caution. But underneath that voice was another truth, simpler and less dramatic. Waiting forever was also a choice, and not always a neutral one. They thought about how many times they'd confused readiness with certainty, as if the right moment would arrive fully formed, labeled clearly, leaving no room for doubt. As if hesitation was proof they weren't allowed to move yet. But nothing in the room worked that way. Not the straps, not the mat, not the muscles in their arms. Strength didn't come from knowing the future. It came from responding to the present. A faint echo of footsteps passed somewhere down the hall. Someone else finishing up. Someone else deciding when to leave. The sound faded quickly, leaving the gym quiet again. They shifted their weight once more, just enough to feel the motion. The strap responded, swinging slightly. A small movement, but it changed the geometry of everything. The body noticed. The mind followed. This, they realized, was the part no one talks about. Not the release itself, but the moment just before it, when you realize you're already in motion. That staying exactly where you are isn't actually possible anymore. They remembered how often they'd waited for permission, for reassurance, for someone or something to tell them it was okay to stop holding. But nothing external ever did. The permission had always come from inside, quietly, without ceremony. Their grip loosened by a fraction. Not enough to let go, but enough to feel the difference. The chalk on their palms no longer felt like security. It felt like residue from something that had already done its job. They exhaled again. This time the breath went all the way down, unforced, unplanned. The body recognized the shift before the mind named it. The fear changed shape. It wasn't gone. It had simply moved from the center to the edges. It no longer felt like a command. It felt like a sensation, tightness, alertness, energy. Something to work with, not something to obey. They let go. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just enough. The moment was exactly as the videos had suggested, and nothing like them at the same time. There was no rush of wind, no surge of panic. Just a brief, weightless sensation where the body was neither holding nor falling. A pause inside the pause. Then gravity did what gravity always does. The mat rose to meet them. Shoes touched down, knees bent naturally. The body absorbed the landing without comment. They stood there surprised by how normal it felt. No applause, no internal fireworks, just the quiet realization that the thing they'd been afraid of hadn't been an ending. It had been a transition short and manageable. They stepped off the mat and shook their hands gently, chalk dust drifting to the floor. Their arms felt warm now, alive in a way that wasn't strained. The kind of tired that comes from movement, not from holding. They sat down on a bench along the wall, breathing slowing on its own. The straps above swayed slightly, then came to rest. The room returned to stillness, unchanged by what had just happened. And yet something had shifted. Not in a way that demanded action tonight. Not in a way that solved anything immediately, but in a way that corrected a misunderstanding they'd been carrying for a long time. Letting go wasn't the opposite of strength. It was a different expression of it. They sat there for a while, hands resting on their thighs, noticing the ordinary details again. The hum of the lights, the faint smell of rubber, the scuff marks on the floor that told quiet stories of other people's pauses and releases. Life, they realized, had been asking for this kind of courage. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that looks good in hindsight. But the courage to trust a moment without guarantees. To release without knowing exactly what comes next. Eventually, they stood up, wiped their hands on a towel, and headed toward the exit. The door opened with a soft push. Cold air rushed in sharp and real. The parking lot lights buzzed overhead, unchanged. They didn't feel fearless walking out into the night. They felt something better unburdened. The pause had done its work. And the next movement, whatever it would be, no longer felt like something to survive. Fear can be loud, but it's rarely original. Most of the time, it's a shape made from something small, stretched across a wall by bad lighting and a tired mind. It was late evening, not fully night yet. The house was quiet in that uneven way it gets. When a day has finally slowed down, but hasn't fully settled. A person stood just outside a child's bedroom doorway, one hand resting lightly on the frame. The hallway light was on. Inside the room, a small nightlight glowed near the floor, casting a soft amber circle across the wall. The child was already asleep, breathing slow, even. One arm flung over the blanket, trusting the world in a way adults tend to forget how to do. On the wall, shadows moved. They weren't dramatic, just shapes, long fingers stretching when someone shifted in the hallway, a curved form where a jacket hung on the back of a chair, something tall and uneven where a stack of books caught the light at the wrong angle. Ordinary things, doing ordinary shadow things. Still, the person paused. They felt that familiar tightening in the chest. The quick mental scan. The subtle urge to step fully into the room and check everything, even though everything had already been checked. The door was locked. The windows were closed. The house was safe. They knew this. And yet, fear doesn't always come from danger. Sometimes it comes from imagination filling in the gaps where understanding has gone quiet. They leaned their head gently against the doorframe and watched the wall a little longer. The shadows shifted again as the HVAC turned on warm air, moving through the vents with a soft rush. The light flickered slightly, then steadied. Nothing had changed. And yet, the shapes looked different. It reminded them of something from childhood. Lying awake, staring at the ceiling, convinced that the dark corners of the room were hiding something alive. Something watching, something waiting. Back then, fear had felt enormous, real enough to sit up with, and what had always fixed it wasn't bravery. It was light. A lamp switched on, a parent's voice, a hand waving across the wall, turning monsters into fingers. The memory settled in quietly. They stepped into the room and adjusted the nightlight, turning it just a little so the glow spread more evenly. The shadows softened instantly. The sharp edges disappeared. The wall looked blank again, almost boring. Nothing dramatic had happened. No threat removed. Just a small change in angle. They stood there, noticing how easily the fear had dissolved. How little effort it took once the light was right. That's when a thought surfaced, gentle but clear. What if some of the fears they carry now are like this, not dangers but distortions? Not warnings, but misunderstandings. Lately, fear had been showing up in subtle ways. Not panic attacks, not sleepless nights. More like a steady sense that something was wrong, even when nothing obvious was. Worry about the future, about making the wrong choice, about missing something important and realizing it too late. The fear didn't scream, it whispered. It showed up as mental images, scenes that hadn't happened yet playing out with certainty. Conversations that ended badly, decisions that led to regret, a life that slowly narrowed instead of opening. All shadows, all convincing. They reached out and gently pulled the blanket higher around the sleeping child's shoulders. The child shifted once, then settled again, unaffected by any of it. That felt important. Fear was very active in the adult mind, but completely absent here. Not because the world was different, but because perception was. They turned to leave the room, then stopped. One last glance at the wall. No shadows now, just paint, just stillness. In the hallway, the light buzzed faintly. They flipped it off and let the house fall into deeper quiet. The kitchen beyond was dim, illuminated only by the glow of the clock on the microwave. Blue numbers, steady, unconcerned. They stood there longer than necessary, listening to the low sounds of the house doing what houses do, settling, adjusting, holding. Fear tried again, softer now. What if you're missing something? They didn't answer the question. They just noticed it. Not everything that appears in the mind is asking to be believed. Some things are just shadows. They moved into the living room and sat on the couch. The cushions dipping familiarly beneath their weight. The room was darker here, but not threatening. Familiar darkness has a different quality. It doesn't ask for explanations. They looked around and noticed how the shapes of furniture blended into one another. How the mind, given enough darkness, always tries to define edges, to name forms, to create stories. It's trying to help. It's just not very good at this part. They leaned back and exhaled, slow and unforced. The fear that had felt sharp earlier now felt thin, still present but less convincing. Like a movie you've already seen once, you can still watch it, but it doesn't have the same grip. They thought again of the wall in the bedroom, of how quickly everything changed when the light shifted. Maybe understanding works the same way. Not forcing fear away, not arguing with it, just bringing a little awareness into the room. They sat there quietly, letting that idea settle without turning it into a rule or a plan. The house stayed still. The night stayed ordinary. And somewhere between the shadows and the light, fear lost some of its shape. The couch held their weight without complaint. The room didn't ask for anything. Outside, a car passed, headlights briefly sliding across the ceiling before disappearing. The darkness returned unchanged. They stayed where they were, letting the mind do what it tends to do when it's finally given space. Thoughts rose, drifted, faded. None of them urgent. None of them demanding action. Fear appeared again, but it came dressed as concern. You should be more prepared. You should think this through again. It sounded responsible, almost caring. They noticed how fear often borrows the language of wisdom, how easily it disguises itself as foresight or caution, and how when you look closely, it's usually repeating the same few images over and over, just changing the lighting. They remembered the child's room. The shapes on the wall hadn't disappeared because someone fought them. They disappeared because they were understood. Understanding didn't make the room brighter. It just made the shadows honest. That thought stayed with them. They stood up and walked toward the kitchen, bare feet quiet on the floor. The clock numbers on the microwave hadn't changed much. Time was moving, but it wasn't in a hurry. They poured a glass of water and drank slowly, feeling the coolness move through their body. Simple sensations have a way of pulling attention out of imagined futures and back into what's actually happening. Fear doesn't like that. Fear prefers abstraction. It prefers what if to what is. They leaned against the counter and looked out the window. The yard was dark. The outlines of trees blended into the night sky. Somewhere leaves rustled. Probably wind. Probably nothing that required interpretation. And that too felt important. So many fears survive because they're never checked against reality. They live in half-seen shapes and incomplete information. They feel real because they've never been looked at directly. They thought about the worries that had been looping lately, about decisions that felt heavy, about uncertainty that refused to resolve, about the constant sense that they were supposed to know more than they did. Those worries had felt large because they were being projected onto a blank wall of the future, like shadows. What if the future isn't dangerous, just dimly lit? That question didn't come with an answer. It didn't need one. It simply shifted the stance from fear to curiosity. They set the glass down and turned off the kitchen light. The room darkened instantly, but it didn't feel threatening. The shapes were familiar now. The mind didn't rush to invent stories about them. They walked back toward the bedroom and paused once more at the doorway. The child hadn't moved. The nightlight cast a steady glow. No shadows had returned. Everything was still. They realized then that fear often asks for certainty. when what it really wants is reassurance, and reassurance doesn't always come from guarantees. Sometimes it comes from recognition, from seeing what something truly is. A jacket isn't a monster. A thought isn't a prophecy. A feeling isn't a verdict. They closed the door gently and moved down the hallway, turning off the last light. The house settled fully into night. In the bedroom, they lay down and pulled the blanket up, feeling its weight press them into the mattress. The body relaxed in small increments, as if releasing tension it hadn't known it was holding. Fear didn't disappear completely. It probably wouldn't. But it no longer dominated the room. It had been reduced to what it actually was, a signal, not a command. A shadow, not a thing. They let their eyes close. Understanding had done its quiet work, not by changing the world, but by changing how it was seen. The night continued calm and ordinary, and in that ordinary darkness, there was nothing to fear. Fear often announces itself loudly. It wants attention. It wants to be heard. It wants to convince you that whatever is making the most noise must also be the most important thing in the room. It was late afternoon when the storm rolled in, earlier than expected. The sky darkened quickly, clouds stacking up in heavy layers, the light thinning out as if someone had turned a dimmer switch too fast. A person stood in the kitchen sleeves, rolled up, rinsing a mug that had already been clean. The radio was off. The house felt alert, waiting. Thunder cracked suddenly, close enough to feel in the chest. The windows rattled. The sound was sharp, commanding, impossible to ignore. They froze for a second, hand still under the running water. The body reacts before the mind explains. A jolt of tension, a shallow inhale, the old instinct that says something's wrong. They turned off the faucet and listened. Rain followed, heavy drops striking the roof in quick succession, then settling into a steady rhythm. Another thunderclap came, louder than the first, stretching out longer, as if the sky were tearing something open. It felt like too much, too sudden. Lately, life had felt like this storm, loud signals everywhere. News alerts, emails with urgent subject lines, conversations that escalated faster than expected. Worries that arrived fully formed, already shouting. The sense that if something is loud, it must be dangerous. If it's quiet, it must not matter. They moved away from the sink and leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely. Outside the window, the small yard blurred under the rain. Leaves shook, branches bent. Everything visible seemed to be reacting. Another crash of thunder hit, followed by a flicker of light. The power didn't go out, but the house dimmed for half a second, enough to make them tense again. Fear likes reinforcement. It builds its case through repetition, through volume, through interruption. They took a breath slower this time and noticed something they hadn't before. Beneath the thunder, beneath the rain, there was another sound. Softer, more consistent. Water moving through the gutters, rain tapping the ground. A low, steady hiss where drops met soil. The storm wasn't just noise, it was also nourishment. They knew this in a factual way, but they hadn't felt it yet. They stepped closer to the window, and looked down toward the corner of the yard where a small patch of soil sat between concrete slabs. Nothing was planted there intentionally. No garden, no plan. Just dirt that collected leaves and whatever seeds happened to land. The thunder boomed again, and the ground outside darkened further as it soaked in the rain. The soil changed color quickly, drinking it in. They found themselves thinking about growth, about how often it's associated with effort, visibility, progress you can point to, and how rarely it's associated with quiet persistence. Thunder feels powerful because it demands attention. But nothing grows because of thunder. Growth happens lower, slower, out of sight. The thought didn't come as comfort. It came as correction. They had been measuring their own life by the wrong signals, by noise, by urgency, by moments of intensity. And when those moments weren't happening, fear filled the gap. Nothing's happening. You're falling behind. You should be further along. Another crack of thunder split the air, and the rain intensified for a moment, drumming hard against the roof. The sound filled the kitchen, leaving no space for subtlety. And yet outside, in that patch of soil, something else was happening. Something that didn't announce itself. Something that wouldn't be visible for days, maybe weeks. Seeds don't respond to noise. They respond to conditions. They need water. They need time. They need darkness. The person stayed by the window, watching the rain soak into the ground. Their shoulders lowered gradually, not because the storm had softened, but because something inside them had stopped reacting to it. They realized how often fear had pulled their attention toward the loudest part of experience, toward the argument, the crisis, the imagined worst-case outcome. How rarely they had trusted what was happening quietly in the background. The storm rumbled again, farther away this time. The sound had less edge to it now, more distance. They thought about all the times they'd mistaken silence for stagnation, all the times they'd assumed that because nothing dramatic was happening, nothing meaningful was. But life doesn't always speak in thunder. Sometimes it speaks in small shifts, in softened soil, in unseen roots pushing gently downward. They rested one hand on the counter and stayed there listening, not for the thunder this time, but for the rhythm beneath it. The rain. The steady, unremarkable work of water meeting earth. Fear was still present. The storm hadn't ended. The noise hadn't vanished, but it no longer felt like the whole story. The storm stayed for a while, not rushing through, not apologizing. Thunder rolled at uneven intervals now, sometimes loud, sometimes distant, like it was slowly losing interest. The rain settled into a steadier pace, less dramatic, more patient. They remained by the window longer than expected. There was no reason to move. Nothing else needed doing. The kitchen felt suspended in this in-between state, neither tense nor fully relaxed, just attentive. The mind, with fewer sharp sounds to react to, began to wander in a different direction. They thought about how fear often trains attention upward and outward, toward headlines, toward raised voices, toward anything that signals urgency. It teaches you to scan for threat instead of noticing support. But the body knows another rhythm. As they stood there, They became aware of their feet against the floor. Cool tile, solid. The weight of their body distributed evenly without effort. The quiet reassurance of gravity doing its work. Outside, the rain continued soaking into the ground. The soil no longer repelled it. It accepted it, darkened, softened. That image stayed. They imagined a seed down there, not a metaphorical one, just an ordinary seed. Small, unimpressive, carried by chance. It didn't respond to the thunder above. It didn't hurry because the sky was loud. It waited for the conditions that actually mattered. Moisture, warmth, time. Fear had been convincing them that progress should feel dramatic. That change should come with noise. That if something important were happening, they'd feel it intensely. But intensity isn't the same as significance. They'd lived long enough to know this intellectually. Still, fear has a way of making you forget what you already understand. Another low rumble passed through the sky farther away now. The storm was moving on, not ending suddenly, just drifting elsewhere. They noticed the quiet that followed each thunderclap, the pause where nothing happened. No damage, no consequence, just space. That pause felt generous. They realized then how often fear had collapsed time for them, how it made every loud moment feel permanent, how it whispered this will last forever when experience kept proving otherwise. Storms pass, so do seasons, so do the states of mind that feel overwhelming while you're inside them. They stepped back from the window and turned the kitchen light down a notch, softening the room. The house responded immediately, becoming warmer, less sharp. They moved to the table and sat, hands resting flat on the surface. The wood was cool, smooth, familiar. Another ordinary sensation anchoring them to the present. The storm had done its work. Not by being impressive, but by bringing what was needed. The rest would happen quietly later, without witnesses. They thought about the parts of their life that felt dormant, the ideas that hadn't surfaced yet, the confidence that seemed to have gone underground, the sense of direction that felt delayed. Maybe none of it was gone. Maybe it was simply responding to a deeper cycle. Fear had been measuring life by thunder, by moments of disruption, pressure, noise. But growth had its own clock, one that didn't announce itself or check for approval. The rain lightened. The sound on the roof thinned to a gentle tapping, then to a hush. The gutters still carried water away, steady and unremarkable. Outside, the yard looked calmer now, washed clean. Nothing visibly different. And yet, everything had changed at the level that mattered. They sat there until the last rumble faded completely. When the storm finally moved on, it didn't leave silence behind. It left the quiet continuation of things. The refrigerator hum, the distant sound of a car driving over wet pavement, the house settling back into itself. Fear had lost its volume, not because it had been confronted or defeated, but because it had been seen in context. Loud, yes, but not in charge. They stood up, turned off the light, and let the kitchen rest in dimness. Tomorrow, they knew the patch of soil outside would look the same as it always did. No visible sprouts, no proof. And that was fine. Some of the strongest changes happen in silence beneath the surface, long before they ask to be noticed. Thunder may announce itself, but life grows quietly, and tonight, that was enough. Some problems don't block the entire road. They sit off to the side, visible but avoidable. And still, we manage to hurt ourselves on them. That evening, the person was pushing a shopping cart across a quiet parking lot. The store lights were bright but soft at this hour, and most cars were already gone. The air carried the faint smell of asphalt, cooling after a warm day. The cart wheels made a low, uneven sound as they rolled. It had been one of those days filled with small frustrations. Nothing worth complaining about out loud, yet enough to keep the mind busy. A delayed response. A misunderstanding that didn't get cleared up. A task that took longer than expected. None of it was urgent anymore. But the mind hadn't received that message. Near the edge of the parking lot, where the pavement met a thin strip of gravel, a large stone sat half embedded in the ground. It wasn't new. It had likely been there for years, pushed aside during construction and forgotten, big enough to notice. Small enough that most people walked around it without thinking. The cart veered slightly as one wheel bumped the stone. Not hard. Just enough to jolt the handle. The person felt irritation flare instantly. Of course. Why is that even there? Without pausing, the person nudged the cart forward again, this time with more force. The wheel struck the stone more directly. The cart stopped short. The handle pressed into the palms. A sharp, unpleasant sensation shot up the arms. The stone hadn't moved. The person exhaled through the nose, annoyed now not just at the obstacle, but at themselves. The cart was pulled back. The stone sat there unchanged, indifferent. That was when it became clear how familiar this moment felt. Overthinking often works this way. A small problem appears, something inconvenient but manageable. Instead of stepping around it, the mind runs straight into it again and again, hoping force will turn it into something else. The person stood there for a second, hands resting on the cart, feeling the lingering tension in the wrists. The parking lot was quiet enough that the sound of a distant engine starting could be heard across the way. Nothing was actually blocking the path. There was plenty of space to go around. Still, the mind replayed the earlier moments of the day. The comment that felt unnecessary. The email that could have been worded better. Each thought hit with the same stubborn insistence as the cart against the stone. If I push harder, it will change. If I think it through one more time, it will resolve. The person looked down at the stone more closely now. It wasn't sharp, it wasn't threatening. Just solid, heavy. Exactly what it was. Some problems are like that. They don't respond to pressure. They don't explain themselves. They simply exist. The person adjusted their grip on the cart, turning it slightly to the side. The wheels rolled smoothly this time, bypassing the stone completely. No resistance, no jolt. The body relaxed almost immediately. That small ease was noticeable. Not dramatic, but clear. The shoulders dropped. The breath slowed. The irritation didn't need to be argued with. It just didn't have anything to push against anymore. Walking toward the car, the person felt a quiet recognition settle in. How often had the day been spent pushing against things that couldn't be changed, replaying moments that were already over, pressing into worries that only grew harder with attention. The groceries were placed into the trunk, one bag at a time. Each movement was simple, mechanical, grounding. The sound of plastic bags rustling, the dull thud as they were set down. The stone remained behind, unchanged, as the cart was returned to its place. Overthinking has a way of convincing us that engagement equals control. That if we keep addressing the issue, it will eventually soften. But some obstacles aren't meant to be confronted head-on. They aren't personal. They aren't tests. They're just there. The person closed the trunk and leaned briefly against the car, noticing the cool metal through their jacket. The earlier frustrations were still present, but they no longer pressed as sharply. Not everything needs to be fixed. Not everything needs a response. Sometimes the simplest relief comes not from pushing through, but from choosing a different path entirely. The stone stayed where it was doing nothing at all. And for the first time that day, the person didn't feel the need to do anything about it. The drive home was quiet. Streetlights passed at a steady rhythm, one after another, casting brief pools of light across the windshield. The radio stayed off. The person didn't feel the need to fill the space with sound. At a red light, the mind tried to return to its old pattern, that moment earlier. That response could have been different. Maybe next time. The thought began, then paused. There was a small awareness now, like a hand hovering just before touching something hot. The recognition came gently. This feels like pushing the cart into the stone again. The light turned green. The car moved forward. The thought didn't finish its sentence. Overthinking doesn't always feel aggressive. Often, it feels responsible, like a duty to review, prepare, and prevent future discomfort. But most of the time, it's just repetition without movement. The same angle, the same pressure, the same result. At home, the person carried the groceries inside. The kitchen light came on warm and familiar. Bags were set on the counter. Keys were placed in their usual spot. The ordinary sounds of evening settled in. One bag tipped slightly, and a can rolled toward the edge of the counter before stopping. The person reached out and steadied it without irritation. No commentary followed. Just a simple adjustment. That too was noticed. The stone from the parking lot returned to mind, not as an image, but as a feeling. Solid, neutral, unmoved by effort. The realization wasn't new, but it felt clearer now. Many worries are exactly like that stone. They don't shift when kicked. They only bruise the one doing the kicking. The person leaned against the counter arms, resting loosely. There was a sense of tiredness there, but also relief. The kind that comes when you stop arguing with what is already in place. Some problems don't require solutions, they require distance. The mind tried once more to circle back. What if ignoring it makes things worse? What if going around is avoidance? The question lingered briefly, then softened. Avoidance runs from reality. Going around accepts it. There's a difference even if it takes time to feel it. Outside, a car passed, tires humming against the road. Inside, the refrigerator clicked on quietly. Life continued in these small, unremarkable ways, untouched by the earlier frustrations. The person thought about how many times the day had been spent hitting the same mental obstacle, replaying words, rehearsing explanations, expecting a different outcome from the same motion. It wasn't wrong to care. It was just unnecessary to collide. The stone wasn't an enemy. It wasn't a failure. It was simply not the path. Later, as the evening settled further, the person stepped outside, briefly standing near the front door. The street was calm. Porch lights glowed softly. Nothing demanded attention. The mind felt quieter, not empty, but less crowded. Thoughts still appeared, but they didn't line up for inspection. They passed like pedestrians crossing a wide street, each one heading somewhere else. There was a quiet understanding forming, not as a rule, but as an option. Next time something feels immovable, it might not be a signal to push harder. It might be an invitation to step aside. No effort required, no defeat implied, just a different direction. The person went back inside, closed the door, and let the evening continue without adding anything extra to it. Some stones remain by the road for years. They don't need to be moved. They don't need to be conquered. They only need to be noticed and then passed by. And that was enough. Some fears don't come from what's actually happening. They come from what the mind repeats. That night, the person was walking through a long parking garage beneath an apartment building. The concrete walls were bare, marked only by faded numbers and old tire streaks. The lighting was dim but steady, and every sound carried farther than expected. Footsteps echoed. A keychain jingled. Even a quiet breath seemed louder than usual. The person slowed without realizing it. The body reacted before the mind had time to explain why. A slight tightening in the chest, a subtle alertness in the shoulders. Nothing was wrong, but the space made it feel like something might be. The mind filled in the rest. Did you hear that? What if someone's behind you? Why does this place always feel unsettling? The person paused near a concrete pillar and glanced around. Empty. Still. Just rows of parked cars and long shadows stretching across the floor. A car door slammed somewhere above. The sound dropped down through the open levels, bouncing and returning in fragments. The person felt a brief spike of tension, then a quiet embarrassment at their own reaction. It was just an echo. But the body didn't know that immediately. It had already responded to the sound, treating it as a signal. The person continued walking, footsteps measured now, listening more carefully. Each step produced a familiar pattern. The sound went out, hit the walls, and came back slightly altered. Louder, longer, less precise. The mind noticed this and began to anticipate it. Every movement seemed to generate another response. Overthinking often works the same way. A thought appears, the mind reacts to it, then reacts again to its own reaction. Soon the original trigger is gone, but the noise remains. The person stopped and deliberately shuffled one foot across the concrete. The sound scraped loudly, then returned in layers. The person waited. No new sound followed. Silence returned quickly. That felt important, though the person didn't rush to define why. Walking again, the person remembered other moments like this. Times when a single comment lingered for hours. When one small mistake seemed to echo through an entire day. When fear multiplied simply because it had space to bounce around. The garage wasn't dangerous. It was just open. And open spaces amplify sound. The person reached the car and unlocked it. The beep echoed sharply, bouncing off the walls. For a split second, the body flinched again. Then the person smiled slightly at the familiarity of the reaction. Even expected sounds can startle when the environment is right. Inside the car, the door closed with a solid thud. The space became smaller, contained. The echoes stopped. The person sat there for a moment before starting the engine, noticing how quickly the body settled once the noise had nowhere to go. Breathing slowed. Shoulders softened. The mind followed. It wasn't that the fear had been unreasonable. It had just been amplified, reflected, repeated. The engine started. Its low hum filled the space, steady and predictable. As the car moved toward the exit, the sound of tires on concrete created another echo. But this one felt different, familiar, controlled. Overthinking often convinces us that the noise in our head is proof of danger. But much of it is just reflection thoughts, bouncing off other thoughts, growing louder each time they return. The person drove slowly up the ramp, passing level after level. With each turn, the echoes shifted, then faded. The open space behind grew distant. Outside, the night air felt different, wider, softer. Sounds didn't cling the same way. The person pulled into the street and let the car coast for a moment, windows slightly open. A breeze passed through, carrying the ordinary sounds of the neighborhood, distant traffic. A dog barking far away, someone laughing on a balcony. None of it echoed. The mind noticed the contrast. How fear had filled the garage, not because it was real, but because it had room to repeat itself. The person didn't make a promise to stop worrying. That would have been another echo. Instead, there was a simple awareness settling in. Not every loud thought comes from something solid. Some of them are just returning sounds. And for now, that understanding was enough to keep moving. Later that night, the person noticed how the garage stayed in the body longer than expected. Not as fear exactly, more like a residue, a slight readiness, a habit of listening too closely. At home, lights were dim, shoes were set by the door. The quiet here was different from the quiet underground. It didn't bounce, it settled. Still, the mind brought things back. That sound earlier, that pause, that moment of tension. The thoughts arrived clearly, as if they were still traveling through open space, waiting to return. The person sat down on the couch and let them come without pushing them away. They didn't feel dangerous now, just loud. Overthinking often survives on repetition. A thought doesn't need to be true to be convincing. It only needs to be heard enough times. In an open mental space, it can keep returning each time, sounding more important than the last. The person leaned back and stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. The sound was steady. It didn't echo. It stayed where it was. That difference stood out. The garage hadn't created the fear. It had just amplified it. The mind does the same thing when it's tired. When it's given too much space and not enough grounding, every worry travels farther than it needs to. One thought calls out. Another answers. Soon it feels like a conversation, even though it's just one voice hearing itself. The person tried a small experiment. They cleared their throat softly. The sound stayed close. No return. A quiet understanding followed, not as a conclusion, but as a sensation. Maybe the fear earlier hadn't been a warning. Maybe it had been a reflection. A memory surfaced from years ago, standing in a canyon during a trip. Someone had shouted just to hear the sound come back. The echo had been thrilling then, surprising, harmless. No one assumed danger. Everyone understood what it was. But in the dark garage, the same effect had felt threatening. Context mattered. The person thought about how often the mind forgets context. How a tired thought at night feels heavier than the same thought in the morning. How silence can turn small worries into loud ones when there's nothing else to absorb them. The couch creaked slightly as the person shifted position. The sound didn't return. The room held it gently. There was no need to force calm. No need to silence the mind. Just noticing where the noise was coming from changed how it landed. The worries from earlier in the day tried to reappear, unfinished conversations. Imagined misunderstandings, possible outcomes that hadn't happened yet. They showed up with the same shape they always had. But now they felt flatter, less three-dimensional, like echoes without a source. The person imagined calling out again inside that garage. Imagined the sound traveling, bouncing, returning. And then imagined simply not calling out at all. The silence that would follow wasn't empty. It was neutral. That felt important. You don't have to answer every echo. You don't have to respond to every thought that comes back louder than it left. Some thoughts only exist because they keep being answered. The person stood up and walked toward the kitchen, bare feet quiet on the floor. A glass was filled with water. The faucet turned off cleanly. The sound stopped exactly where it should. The body relaxed a little more. The garage would still be there tomorrow. The echoes would still happen if someone walked through it again. Nothing about that needed to be fixed or avoided. What had changed was the understanding of what an echo actually is. Not a warning, not a message, just sound returning in an open space. The mind too has spaces like that. Wide, hollow areas where thoughts bounce around when nothing else is present. Filling those spaces doesn't require more thinking. Sometimes it just requires contact with the body, with the room, with something solid and near. The person finished the water and set the glass down. The sound was soft, final. It didn't come back. For the rest of the evening, thoughts still appeared. But when they grew loud, the person recognized the pattern. This feels like an echo. And without effort, without argument, the sound faded on its own. The cave had never been dangerous. It had just been empty. And now, there was enough here to keep the noise from returning. The guitar had been leaning against the wall for months. Not broken. Not dusty enough to look abandoned. Just untouched. He noticed it one evening while turning off the lights. The room was quiet in that end-of-day way. No music, no TV, just the soft hum of the refrigerator in the other room. He reached for the lamp, then stopped. The guitar was still there, exactly where he had left it. He used to play more often. Not on stages, not for anyone special, just for himself late at night when the world felt too loud. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped. There hadn't been a clear reason. Life had simply filled the space. Work, responsibilities. The tired kind of evenings where even small joys feel like extra effort. He told himself he would get back to it when things slowed down, when he felt more like himself again. He walked over and picked it up. The wood was cool under his fingers, familiar, unchanged. He sat on the edge of the couch and rested the guitar on his knee. Didn't tune it, didn't play. He just held it. A thought surfaced uninvited. What's the point? I don't even play anymore. It wasn't cruel, just practical. The kind of thought that sounds reasonable enough to believe. He looked at the strings. They were still intact, slightly dull maybe, but not ruined. He ran his thumb gently across them. A soft, uneven sound filled the room. It wasn't a song, barely a note. Still, the sound lingered for a second before fading. He noticed something then. The guitar hadn't lost its value in the silence. It hadn't become less of a guitar just because no one was listening. It was still what it was. He leaned back and thought about himself. How often he measured his worth by what he produced, by how useful he felt, by how visible his efforts were. When those things slowed down, the doubt moved in quickly. He set the guitar back against the wall gently this time. Not like an object being put away, more like something being trusted to wait. He turned off the lamp. In the dark, the room felt different. Not emptier, just quieter. And for the first time in a while, the silence didn't feel like failure. He woke up the next morning before his alarm. The room was still dim, the kind of light that didn't ask anything from you yet. For a moment, he lay there listening. The building settling. A car passing far below. Someone's footsteps in the hallway. Nothing special. And yet he felt strangely present. As he got up, his eyes moved instinctively toward the corner of the room. The guitar was still there, leaning exactly where he had placed it the night before. It didn't call to him. It didn't demand anything. It just existed. While making coffee, his mind drifted back to a familiar pattern. How quickly he judged himself during quiet periods. How easily he confused stillness with falling behind. If he wasn't creating, improving, or contributing in a visible way, he assumed something was wrong. He carried his mug back into the living room and sat down. The guitar remained silent, and that was okay. He thought about all the objects in the room that held value without constant use. The couch that didn't prove itself every day. The books that waited patiently on the shelf. The lamp that stood ready even when it wasn't turned on. None of them had to earn their place each morning. Why had he decided that he did? He realized that somewhere along the way, he had tied his worth to sound, to output, to being noticed. Silence to him had started to feel like disappearance. But the guitar showed him something else. Silence wasn't absence. It was rest. It was potential not being spent. He reached over and touched the neck of the guitar again. Not to play, just to acknowledge it. There was no pressure to return to who he used to be. No need to reclaim a past version of himself just to feel valid. The instrument didn't care how long it had been quiet. It didn't keep score. It was ready when it was ready. And so was he. He stood up, rinsed his mug, and set it in the sink. The day would begin soon. Emails, meetings, responsibilities. But something had shifted. He didn't feel the urge to prove anything before stepping into it. As he left the apartment, the guitar stayed where it was, silent, whole. And for the first time, he understood that his value worked the same way. They stood at the stainless steel sink at the back of the restaurant, sleeves rolled up, the air still warm from the dinner rush. Most of the noise had faded now. No more orders being called. No more clatter of pans. Just water and breath. A crate of vegetables waited on the counter. Carrots, green onions, and a bundle of lotus roots still streaked with dark mud. They picked one up. It was heavier than it looked. Cold. Rough in places where the dirt clung stubbornly to the skin. They turned on the tap. Water hit metal with a steady, familiar sound. Not loud, not quiet, just constant. They began to rinse the root, slowly rubbing the surface with their thumbs. Mud loosened and slid away in thin brown lines, disappearing down the drain. They had cooked lotus root many times before. Sliced thin for stir-fry, thicker for soup. Sometimes fried, sometimes braised. They knew what it looked like inside. Pale, clean, marked with small round holes like a quiet pattern. Still, every time they washed one, the contrast caught them off guard. So much darkness on the outside. Such a clean structure within. Their mind drifted, as it often did during these late moments when the body was busy and the thoughts had room to move. They thought about where they came from, about the parts of their life they didn't usually talk about. The years that felt heavy with mistakes, silence, and choices they didn't know how to explain without flinching. There were things they had buried deep, not because they were evil, just because they were painful. They rinsed again. More mud came off. They remembered how often they felt the need to clean themselves before letting anyone look too closely. As if the mess had to be gone first. As if healing required a perfect story. They had learned early that it was easier to be acceptable than honest. The water kept running. They turned the lotus root in their hands and found a stubborn patch of dirt lodged in a shallow groove. They pressed harder this time, working it loose. For a moment, they wondered why lotus grew this way at all. Why something meant to become a flower had to begin in thick black mud. It seemed unfair. Other plants reached for the sun right away. Lotus had to start where the water was heavy and the light barely reached. They paused, holding the root under the stream. Then it occurred to them quietly, without any drama. The mud wasn't a mistake. It wasn't something the lotus survived despite. It was the condition that made the lotus possible. Without that depth, without that pressure, there would be no flower later on. They felt something soften in their chest. Not relief, not forgiveness, just understanding. They set the cleaned root on the cutting board and picked up the knife. The blade met the surface with a solid, gentle sound. The first slice revealed the inside. White, even, almost delicate. Nothing about it showed where it had come from. They sliced again and again. Each piece fell neatly to the side, identical in structure, calm in its simplicity. They thought about how often they judged themselves by their beginnings, by the mess, by the years that didn't look good when lined up neatly, as if growth was only valid when it started clean, as if beauty was supposed to arrive without passing through anything difficult first. They lined the slices into a small pile. Their hands moved steadily now, practiced and sure. The body knew what to do even when the mind wandered. They realized something then. Maybe they didn't need to erase the mud from their story. Maybe they didn't need to pretend it hadn't been there. Maybe it was enough to know that it had fed something deeper, something solid, something real. They turned off the water. The kitchen felt quieter without it. They looked down at the lotus slices one more time before gathering them up. Clean, ready, and still connected to where they came from. They carried the sliced lotus root over to the stove and set the pan down gently, careful not to rush the moment. The heat was low, just enough to warm the surface without forcing anything to happen too fast. As the pieces met the pan, a soft sound rose up, steady and calm. The kind of sound that didn't demand attention, but filled the space anyway. They stood there, stirring slowly, letting the rhythm guide their breathing. In moments like this, the body remembered things the mind often forgot. That growth didn't happen all at once. That warmth worked better than pressure. That forcing only made things tough. They thought again about the years they had spent trying to outgrow their past by pretending it wasn't there, as if distance alone could erase it, as if time automatically meant healing. But standing here now, they understood something more honest. Healing wasn't about cutting away everything that had been dark or painful. It was about learning how to hold those parts without letting them define every step forward. The lotus root softened as it cooked its sharp edges, rounding out its surface, taking on a gentle sheen. Nothing about it tried to hide where it had been. And yet, it was becoming something nourishing. They felt a quiet shift inside. The parts of their life that had grown in confusion, in struggle, in silence, those parts hadn't ruined them. They had given them depth, sensitivity, a way of seeing what others missed. They had learned patience from waiting, strength from staying, compassion from knowing what it felt like to be misunderstood. These weren't flaws, they were roots. They turned off the heat and let the pan rest, steam lifting slowly into the air. The kitchen felt different now, not because anything had changed, but because they were no longer fighting their own story. They didn't need to rewrite it. They didn't need to clean it up for anyone else. What mattered was how they carried it forward. They plated the lotus root carefully, each slice placed with intention rather than urgency. It didn't have to be perfect. It only had to be honest. As they stepped out of the kitchen and into the cooler night air behind the building, they paused for a moment. The city sounded distant here, softened by walls and space. They took a slow breath and felt the ground under their feet. For the first time in a long while, they didn't feel the urge to escape their past or outrun it. It could stay where it was. It had already done its work, and now it was enough to keep growing. He started his night shift the same way he always did, by checking the perimeter, walking the same path he had walked hundreds of times before. The ground was damp from earlier rain, and the air carried that quiet, salty smell that only came from being close to the water. Most people were already home by this hour. Lights on, doors locked. Even the city seemed to lower its voice at night. He didn't mind working when no one was around. In some ways, it suited him. There was less to prove, less to perform. He passed a low fence and paused near the edge of the lot, where he could see the faint outline of the ocean beyond the structures. Far out in the distance, a lighthouse turned slowly, its beams sweeping across the dark with calm precision. The light didn't rush. It didn't blink for attention. It simply did its job again and again without checking who was watching. He leaned against the rail and watched it for a moment. There were nights when he wondered if his own work mattered. Security guard wasn't the kind of job people asked questions about with interest. It didn't sound impressive at dinner tables. When someone asked what he did, he usually answered quickly and moved on. Still, he showed up. Every shift, every weather, even on nights when his body felt heavy and his thoughts wandered too easily toward doubt. He checked his watch. Plenty of time left. As he continued walking, his footsteps echoed softly, steady and unremarkable. He thought about how often he measured his value by response, by praise, by someone noticing. When no one commented, no one thanked him, he sometimes felt invisible. But the lighthouse didn't seem to struggle with that question. It wasn't waiting for applause from passing ships. It didn't dim itself when the sea was empty. It shone because that was its role. That thought stayed with him as he finished his round and returned to his post. He sat down, pulled his jacket closer, and let the night settle around him. The wind moved through the open space, carrying the sound of waves breaking somewhere beyond sight. The lighthouse beam crossed the water again, briefly lighting the surface before moving on. He realized something quietly. Purpose didn't need an audience, and maybe neither did he. He sat there breathing evenly, letting the thought land without forcing it to mean more than it needed to. The night continued. The light kept turning. And for now, that was enough. Later in the shift, The temperature dropped slightly, the kind of change you felt more in your bones than on your skin. He stood up and stretched, rolling his shoulders, then walked back toward the railing where the view opened up again. The lighthouse was still there. Its beam moved in the same slow rhythm, unbothered by the passing hours, tracing a circle that never rushed and never hesitated. Watching it, he noticed how steady it was, how little it seemed to care about whether anyone was counting its turns. He thought about how different that was from the way he lived. So much of his energy went into checking reactions, reading rooms, wondering if what he did mattered enough to be seen. Even kindness sometimes felt like it needed proof. He had held doors open, covered extra shifts, listened when people needed to talk, and then quietly wondered afterward if any of it made a difference. If no one mentioned it, the doubt crept in. The lighthouse offered a simpler answer. It didn't ask the sea if it was useful tonight. It didn't adjust its light based on traffic. It simply stayed on. That realization settled in him slowly, like warmth spreading rather than a sudden flash of clarity. He wasn't meant to shine for recognition. He was meant to show up because it was his responsibility, his choice, his way of contributing to the world as it was, and that was already enough. He returned to his chair and sat down, hands resting loosely on his knees. The radio beside him remained silent, its faint static barely noticeable. For once, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt complete. He thought about tomorrow, about the small routines that would fill the hour's coffee keys, the familiar walk to his post. None of it felt heavy anymore. He understood now that worth wasn't something handed out by passing ships. It was something steady, built through presence, through consistency, through staying lit even when no one looked your way. The beam crossed the water again. He breathed out slowly. The night moved on, and he moved with it, grounded in the simple truth that doing what you are meant to do, with care and without demand, is its own kind of light. She stayed a few minutes after closing, even though no one asked her to. The clinic was quiet now, the kind of quiet that came after a long day of voices, instructions, and small talk that required constant attention. She moved through the rooms, slowly gathering trays and placing used tools into the metal basin by the sink. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. She turned on the water. It flowed over the instruments in a thin, steady stream, washing away what the day had left behind. She watched it for a moment, letting the rhythm pull her out of her thoughts. There was a faint ache behind her eyes. Not a headache exactly, more like emotional fatigue settling in. As she sorted the tools, her mind drifted back to a comment someone had made years ago, a sentence said casually, without much thought. It had landed harder than it should have. She didn't remember the exact words anymore, only the feeling they left behind. Small, exposed. She had carried that feeling with her longer than she cared to admit. Even now it surfaced unexpectedly, usually when she was already tired. It showed up as self-doubt, as the quiet urge to over-explain, as the habit of apologizing before anyone asked. She lifted a pair of instruments and placed them carefully on the tray. Metal touched metal with a soft clink. She had tried many ways to get rid of that old hurt, ignoring it, outgrowing it, proving it wrong. None of it worked for long. The water continued to run, and she let her hands rest under it for a moment, warmth spreading across her palms. She remembered something she had once read about pearls, how they weren't created from comfort, but from irritation. A grain of sand entering the shell rubbing against something tender. The oyster didn't reject it. It couldn't. Instead, it responded the only way it knew how. By coating the irritation again and again, slowly, patiently, until the sharpness was no longer sharp. She looked down at her hands. How many times had she done the same thing, wrapped herself in competence, in politeness, in being useful? Layer by layer, she had protected the soft parts that felt too exposed to leave unguarded. She had always thought of those layers as armor, as something she needed because she was weak. Standing there now, she saw them differently. They weren't signs of failure. They were evidence of survival. The water cooled as she turned the handle slightly, bringing the stream down to a gentler flow. She breathed in and out slow and steady. The ache behind her eyes eased. She finished cleaning the last tray and set it aside to dry. The room felt lighter, even though nothing had changed. She turned off the sink. In the sudden quiet, she felt the old hurt still there, but it no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like a beginning. She dried her hands slowly and leaned back against the counter, letting her shoulders drop for the first time that day. The clinic was completely still now, as if it too was resting. She thought about how often she had judged herself for being sensitive, for remembering things others had forgotten, for carrying words longer than they were meant to be carried. She had told herself she needed thicker skin, that being affected meant something was wrong with her. But pearls didn't form in shells that felt nothing. They formed where something had been irritated, where the surface was soft enough to notice. That idea stayed with her as she turned off the lights and walked toward the exit. The hallway felt longer in the dim, but not uncomfortable. Outside, the evening air was cool and clean. She paused before getting into her car, hands resting on the door, and took a deep breath. She felt tired but not drained. She realized then that the old hurt hadn't weakened her. It had shaped the way she listened, the way she noticed when someone else felt uneasy, the way she chose her words carefully. These weren't flaws. They were layers she had built to protect something valuable. For the first time, she didn't feel the need to peel them away. She didn't have to heal by becoming harder or less affected. She could heal by being kinder to the part of herself that had learned how to cope. She started the car and pulled out of the lot, headlights cutting through the quiet street. The road ahead was familiar, unremarkable, and that felt comforting. As she drove, she let herself sit with the idea that maybe her sensitivity wasn't a problem to fix. Maybe it was the very thing that allowed something beautiful to form. Not because she chose the pain, but because she learned how to respond to it. When she reached home, she turned off the engine and sat for a moment longer than usual. No music, no phone, just stillness. She placed one hand over her chest, feeling her breath rise and fall beneath it. The hurt hadn't disappeared, but it had changed. And in that change, she felt something close to peace. The stories are done. The lessons are learned. There is nothing left to do. If you found peace in this sanctuary tonight, you can return here whenever you wish. We will keep the fire lit for you. If you wish to support this channel, you may leave a gentle like or subscribe so we can find each other again in the vast ocean of the internet. But now, as we move into the final space of rest, let's plant seeds of peace deep into your subconscious. Let go, drift, and let these truths become your own. I am rooted to this moment like an ancient mountain. I am rooted to this moment like an ancient mountain. I am rooted to this moment like an ancient mountain. My body feels heavy and solid, like warm stone. My body feels heavy and solid, like warm stone. My body feels heavy and solid, like warm stone. The winds of thought blow around me, but I remain unmoved. The winds of thought blow around me, but I remain unmoved. The winds of thought blow around me, but I remain unmoved. I possess the silent strength of the earth. I possess the silent strength of the earth. I possess the silent strength of the earth. My stillness is ancient and deep. My stillness is ancient and deep. My stillness is ancient and deep. Stable and completely safe. Grounded, stable, and completely safe. I am grounded, stable, and completely safe. Like a mountain in winter, I am wrapping myself in a blanket of silence. Like a mountain in winter, I am wrapping myself in a blanket of silence. Like a mountain in winter, I am wrapping myself in a blanket of silence. I rest in the foundation of my own being. Rest in the foundation of my own being. Rest in the foundation of my own being. Breathing is slow and steady, like the seasons. My breathing is slow and steady like the seasons. My breathing is slow and steady like the seasons. Timeless as the rocks. As timeless as the rocks. The earth supports me. I can let go of holding myself up. The earth supports me. I can let go of holding myself up. The earth supports me. I can let go of holding myself up. Sanctuary of stillness. Sanctuary of stillness. Sanctuary of stillness. External noise cannot shake my inner ground. External noise cannot shake my inner ground. External noise cannot shake my inner ground. Relaxation sinking into the earth. Relaxation sinking into the earth. Relaxation sinking into the earth.